Hi, this is Alexcursus, a show where I take a look at some Gunpla and see how authentic they are. This time, we are looking at the FD-019 Zowort from the HG Witch from Mercury. Zowort is the standard offering of Paley's technology in Astella, much like their peers of JTAG who offer power in their mobile suits and Glassly defense system who offer tactics. Paley's technologies offer speed, and Zowort, as we will look in closely later, really embodies that philosophy. I'll be rating this kit with Saga, style, action, gimmick, and absence. Style is how much the kit resembles its counterpart in the anime, manga, games, or other media. And like its peers in Witch from Mercury, the Zowort is a pretty accurate recreation, as its 3D model is used as reference for the animation. Now Zowort have another advantage. Its designer, Inata Wataru, of Armor Core and Evangelion Rebuild fame, have quite well understanding of the design of the joints. So Zowort, despite being quite a lengthy design, on paper it didn't get stretched out like its peers from Witch from Mercury. Starting from the head, you can really see some Armor Core resemblance. I wouldn't really call it influence because this is definitely influenced by the likes of GM. But if you can see underneath the visor, there is a ball-like or a mono-eye-like design. I did paint it in gold so that it shows up better. But yeah, there is a sculpt of a big round optic or mono eye inside of the head. This could either be the mono eye type of GM or some later, say, Orc or New Zeon design. We have an antenna for the Astasia's Goose Juice. Curiously, it is a blade type antenna like Zaku. I would also like to mention how the assembly gaps are very natural on this head. Like right at the color separation, and it's even designed to, have a separation gap, like embossed gap. And then you got the two parts on the cheek. That's good on the head. On the chest, it's basically one with the backpack-ish, but yeah, let's just look at the chest for now. Just like the head, you can't really see where the assembly gaps are, and it's being cleverly hidden by the guards of the intake. So that's your assembly gap from the front of the chest to the back. Now the two pieces on the side are separate pieces, but there's a backpack, so once again it's well hidden. And then there's a sort of inner frame structure inside, so those gaps are covered by the armor outside. And the middle is surprisingly not a separate piece, but one with the front of the index. The only not super clever bit is how these blocks in front of the index are not part of the inner frame. But yeah, either way, it is still quite an impressive build with very natural gaps. And then you got a one-piece abdomen armor, and then the lower abdomen as one piece. So again, very little eyesore joint gaps that you can see on the torso. Skirt, not much of a skirt to speak of, just one plate in the middle protecting the pelvis, really. There is another piece protecting the rear end. No side skirts, but from the color separation we can see there is armor on top of the joint. The leg armor, like the chest, is very well separated. They even have some overlaps, so most of the assembly gaps are either hidden or very well embossed. Like the back of the calf, the armor actually goes in a little bit further before the front shin knee guard armor overlap onto it. You can see here near the bottom, like near the trouser end. It's not that quite far all the way through, but there is enough overlap that you don't really, see a gap peeking inside even if you shine a light directly onto it. The thigh is slightly less well taken care of, but there is still a embossed line for the assembly gap at the back. And we get color separation for the knee thrusters, something that even some of the Witch from Mercury Gundam doesn't get, as well as the front end of the, I guess these are supposed to be auxiliary fuel tanks, maybe propellant tanks, maybe. They could well be extra thrusters that's just not presented on the standard Zowort model, if I remember correctly. Anyways, ankle armor just to the front, and that big ankle joint, and then basically boots. And then the backpack is quite substantial in size. It is almost as large as the chest, but it is not sticking out because the assembly is part of the torso. You can see two large thruster here, again color separated. These ones are not. I basically just use my panel liner to darken it. It looks okay. Like while these factor thrusters are just two piece and then another piece for the nozzle, it have quite a bit of sculpt on it, even at the back where it's supposed to join the main backpack. So very good and simple build. A bit unfortunate is this main thruster exhaust at the back. It has no color separation. Once again, I just used the panel liner to darken it, but it looks alright. Over the top you do see the gap where the backpack joins the main body, and then there is another piece for the hood of the intake near the back of the Zowort. Still, overall low part count. Like, it seems like they have a lot of parts for the Zowort body and backpack overall, but it all comes in at this tight package, and it's not a lot of little bits in the sprue, so it's really well done. As for the arms, very spindly, like even compared to the legs. Like the legs are kind of thin, but they still have some substance. And then the arm, basically skeleton. Even the armors are just really pinpointed at the elbow. But once again, very natural assembly gaps. Like you can barely see the clamshell, that is the shoulder itself, and then just a little guard covering most of that joint. And then as we'll see later, this is just the green part going over the gray, but it looks natural enough. It's not wild. And yet, the elbow joint is a C-clip, despite, this large disc. So that means you can actually paint up the whole elbow before you put it back together. bicep is still one piece, but it is quite a complex shape at that. And yeah, I do think the Zowort design really reinforced Paley's emphasis on speed. Like they have a large backpack with some serious thrusters and then legs that definitely didn't skip leg days. And while the arms are not, completely important for speed, they are long enough that you believe Zowort have some sort of, flight control of its own. In fact, it is said that Zowort is capable of atmospheric flight on its own, and I think they're talking about some sort of long-range flight because most of the mobile suits in Estella can achieve some sort of aerial combat in short periods. Definitely looks speedy, definitely accurate to the anime, and definitely look much better than you would expect from an HG. Like usually you would expect some sort of, gap or clear indications. I mean, you kind of do like at the shoulder joint where, the arm goes in, but, these are a bit obvious. Usually there are some places where they could have covered it, but not quite did because, it is actually is not supposed to be super detailed. Like the back of the leg even have a thruster in separate color, sort of. I have to give an S for Zowort for style. It is definitely one of the best color separation and part separation you can find for HG. If you haven't seen me talking about Zowort's counterpart, the Lenza, how the part separation isn't too different from the Jugok Jaeger, which is 2 decades older. Zowort is on the other end of the spectrum. As in, yeah, its part separation isn't too different from 20 years ago as well, but it comes out definitely very modern as opposed to the Lenza. I don't think there is something fundamentally wrong with the Lenza's design, but I do think, Inata Wataru definitely show himself as a very competent mechanical designer that his mobile suit design can, fulfill a lot of the model kit requirements that is not in the anime. And that's probably why he landed the lead designer role in Gundam G-Quacks. But, we'll save that for the G-Quacks kit. For Zowort, definitely an S for style. Next is action. Action isn't just the number of articulations, but also how useful those articulations are. Back to the head again, it is on a ball joint. There is a second ball into the torso, but it is quite tight, much like the Lenza. So you don't really get a lot out of that. And Zowort's head and the clearance around it isn't too much, but you can still do this. So pretty good head movement. And then as we had a bit of a look, Zowort's had ab crunch. Quite a bit at that as well. You can see how the lower abdomen and the mid section have separate crunch. So while it is not a lot of angle from the side, it is definitely very expressive as to how much crunch it is giving. Now, despite not believing in side skirts, Zowort actually have a more limiting side movement for the thigh, which isn't a big problem, to be honest, because you also get a thigh joint And then there's rotation for it as well. So yeah, it can just kick all the way back, but surprisingly not quite as crazy as the Linzer, oddly enough. And then knee, a single joint knee, not quite 180, basically limited by the armor design, and can't quite kick its own ass because the backpack is in the way and the lower leg is too long. Interestingly, the skirts can move quite a lot, so you can actually have Zowort sort of having the down form like a Rotom. Now toe movement, and then the feet is actually on a ball joint that have a hinge in front, and the ankle armor is on a ball joint, but it's pretty tight ball joint. The arms fairly standard affair, shoulder hinge, and then ball joint to a hinge on the shoulder, which have rotation on the bicep. Elbow is on a single joint, but then that is quite a far single joint that only limited by the armor. Still looks relatively natural. Backpack, the factor thrusters can move, although it is a bit of an understatement to call them factor thrusters, unless they really get their thrust from the backpack and these are just giant tubes. Either way, they can go all the way forward. Some people speculated these are cannons, they're not, but yeah, Zowort can definitely use them for a 180 if it's willing, or all the way down if needed. And let's check the limits of Zowort. The relatively narrow feet is not a favorable for Zowort in this case, and the foot, the ball joint here and the ball joint here isn't super, but we will see. It is a matter of balance more than anything. Alright, that's an S of action for Zowort. Although a very close clutch. I did spend some time finding the right place for the feet, but we found it. That's cool. Action for Zowort, very modern kit. Not much wrong about it, even though it is actually somewhat limiting compared to the Linzer at places somehow. Yeah, despite being much more in shape, Zowort's action isn't quite as free as the Linzer. And probably because of the smaller feet, it can't quite stand on one leg quite as easily. It didn't. Still an S-grade performance. Next is Gimmick. Gimmicks are usually the optional weapons on board weapons and then some additional functionality of the mobile suit recreated in the kit. In case of Zowort, we have taken a look at the factor thrusters already, and you would be speculating what the heck are these rods in the forearm. And if you haven't guessed it, they are beam saber hilts. Now they don't have a minimal guard in a lot of other beam saber designs, so it can get buried, but the beam saber sort of limited it once you put the blade on. Shake test, pretty secured despite having no hilt or anything, And what we couldn't see in style is underneath the beam saber, they actually have scopes for them. There is a bit of assembly gap on the width, but I don't think that is too unnatural, at least compared to the beam saber sockets. But at this scale, what else can you do on that beam saber socket? I mean, personally, I will have it, in a hood, like more like a holster type of situation. But I think a connector piece is fine. It's not too much of an eyesore, really. And Zowort get a ranged weapon as well. This beam gun is actually quite cool. It actually have a tilting grip that's open from the bottom, and then you slot it in at the end, and then you close it up. So you get a full guard on your beam gun without, having to disassemble it. Now I thought the barrel is an optic, so I put on some tapes in it. That's why it's shining now. But yeah, it also kind of works as like, the beam shooting out effect with the light hitting. So that's okay. Another cool thing about this beam gun is it have a removable clip. Although unlike the Lenza, you can't store the clip anywhere on Zowort. And if you can see it, the clip have like an Elmo sculpted into it. As far as I know, Pele's only offers beam weapons and the magazines. It's supposed to be an energy clip, but then somehow they sculpt a ammunition. Still cool sculpt, just kinda out of place. But this is it. That's all Zowort's weapons. Doesn't even have falcons. Basically, Pele built Zowort for mobile suits version of dogfighting. You kinda, strafe people with the beam guns and then finish them off with your beam saber, if that makes sense. So yeah, for Gimmick, Zowort doesn't really have much, just the beam gun and beam saber. Sure, 2 beam saber blade, 2 beam saber hilts, but it is kind of standard these days, so nothing to be, praised of. Having said that, since my standards have always been A rank for accurate depiction to the anime or manga, or most of its depiction, and yeah, basic Zowort's basic equipment are just the beam gun and the beam sabers. No points to be deduced, so A for Gimmick, begrudgingly. Last and certainly least in this case is absence. There is nothing really missing for the Zowort. As far as Heshi kits goes, Zowort is almost perfect, or if not perfect already. If I have any wish list, I guess, is the chest. Part separation is kind of a letdown. You can see how much panel liner I have put on it to make the gap darker. It is a very deep and very narrow sculpt. And if you're using the more aggressive type of panel liner, instead of the water-based type that I am using here, you might actually crack the parts. So, and it is not cast in a particularly tight sprue, or the sprue space isn't super tight. They do have quite a bit of runner space in between. So I think to make the kit even more perfect, they should make the chest into 3-piece, so it would have a real part separations for the 3 section of the chest. But yeah, otherwise I cannot complain about a kit with most of the auxiliary thrusters or apogee motors being color separated, and even with some of the exposed ball joints, they don't look too bad. Like the scope inside the head behind the visor, it would be nice if there is something that make it easier for me to paint, but not a big deal. Bandai certainly delivers Zowort here, and the box size is not super large like Gilgok Jaeger back in the day. So really, I am not going to give it an S because it does not have a lot of extra parts. I don't think kids needs to have all those extra parts or options for the most part. I do think it's probably more fair to keep optional parts as optional parts on the side of the models, although it is welcome to have some, and Zowort just have no surprises like that to get higher than A. To recap, Zowort is very accurate to his anime counterparts and his line art design, probably thanks to Inata Wataru being a very seasoned mechanical designer that focus on functional 3D models. And Bandai did a very good job at realizing his vision, despite not really using a lot of new techniques. As for action, same as the rest of the Witch from Mercury lines, it has excellent actions, it can even stand on one foot. Paradoxically, it is not quite as nimble as the Linzer at places, despite having some of the thinnest limbs. Still, as for action, with the super forward foot. For Gimmick, relatively simple, just a pair of beam saber and a beam gun. That's all she wrote, and Bandai delivers. It even recreates the beam saber holster on the forearm, and these beam sabers are real hilts that you can put beam saber blades on as a beam saber. And the guns having a full guard without needing to deassemble either the hand or the gun itself to behold, that is excellent gimmick. But because there's no surprise, it is just an A. Lastly, for absence, nothing is really amiss on the Zowort. It is only really limited by the very concise design of Zowort itself. And Bandai just not at the best mood to give you anything extra. So, the verdict for the Witch from Mercury HG FD19 Zowort is S for style, S for action, A for gimmick, and A for absence. What I failed to mention during all of this is Zowort is another HG that Bandai offers no stickers at all, not even for the eye. Given how rounded the sculpt for the eye behind the visor is, I don't think a sticker would do a terribly good job. And I think it is a good decision on Bandai's part to have a good sculpt over a good place for stickers to go on. Now, I am not sure how far Bandai was planning to push this Zowort sculpt for them to have a complex sculpt at the inside of the head as opposed to the negative side of the visor, but it is definitely a great improvement over the Leo. In fact, there are few parts of this build that really reminds me of the Leo, like the legs. If you can see when I take a closer look at them, there are few runner knobs that are on the inclines of the curves. I'm not sure, like I can clean them clean enough that they are not an eyesore. I'm not sure if Bandai intended to fix that or Bandai is leaving it as a challenge for the builder to improve themselves on. They're not too terrible, but if Bandai really want to push their HG kits to be even more new builder friendly or more or less too intensive, let's put it that way, you need less care or tool to build it and look good on a strike build, they should look into those. But they are not a big enough trouble for me to make a comment to affect their ranking. So yeah, if you're looking at Gunpla, but you're not looking at a Gundam, and you come across Zowort, I would definitely recommend it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.